Hello again. Just to touch on the fact that this video will be about my son's symptoms for autism with a profile of PDA, pathological demand avoidance. He also has ADHD and a sensory processing disorder. So what I've done is I've tried to put them into categories, but a lot of them overlap. So you'll have to bear with me a little bit. Now, Orin was born 4 weeks early, so nothing particularly bad, but he was very poorly when he was born. He had sepsis and he had this respiratory distress syndrome. He was in special care. He would have to have his blood gases done every hour. The only reason I'm saying this is because this was where it started as such, and I think in my mind I had the fact that he was sensitive to touch because of him having the hourly bloods done for about 5 days. So to start with, the sensory processing disorder. Now we start with that because that's what he was diagnosed with first. Now, I know some areas, the paediatricians say that there is no such thing as a standalone diagnosis of sensory processing disorder. It has to go alongside something like autism or ADHD, because I'm unaware of it being in the NICE guidelines that it's a standalone diagnosis. But I know in this area it is a diagnosis, and it is something that Orin definitely has. It started, as I say, incredibly sensitive to touch, and I always put that down to the fact that he had hourly bloods done as a very small baby. Certain feeling, he wouldn't be swaddled. He would prefer to be on the floor in a bassinet, in a bouncy chair. He hated being held. I breastfed my babies, and he would feed in a manner that I found very bizarre, but it was, as I say, I put it down to the fact that he was sensitive to touch, and he would be as far away from me as he possibly could be. But other than that, I assumed that it was just the fact that it had left a lasting effect on him being held. He was very, very sensitive to loud noises right from a baby. Hoovers, bag, when you flap a bin bag, those sort of things. He was incredibly sensitive to noise. As he started toddling at this point, he would walk on the reverse side of his foot. So we usually walk on this side and he's walking on the opposite side, on reverse tiptoes almost. So it was very very bizarre, but again, every child is different. Every child does things in a different manner. He never kind of left the health system, because he was poorly when he was born. He carried on under that. Then he had a weakness on his left side in his muscle. He had very low muscle tone, so he would always slope to the side. So we kind of then went to physio, and we stayed with the physio, we then went to an occupational therapist, who then went on to a paediatrician. So that just sort of gives you a indication of where we were, because obviously I think having the input there helped me. Really, we went to see an occupational therapist when Orin was 18 months, and she did lots of tests and things like rubbing balls up his arm. Couldn't tolerate it at all. As he was walking, he couldn't stand anything on his feet, socks or shoes. And yet if he was walking barefoot, say at the beach, he couldn't tolerate the sand. He couldn't tolerate the grass. He had an incredibly high pain threshold. I remember him being very hot, and me thinking, there's something not right. His temperature was at 42. We took him to the doctor. He had a double ear infection and he wasn't crying in the slightest. So much so that the doctor was quite alarmed that he wasn't showing any signs of distress. So that was that really. And food has been a nightmare with Orin. He certain textures, food can't touch each other, and noise. The slightest little noise sets Orin off. So that's the sensory processing for Orin. We kind of had it diagnosed before we even knew what it was, because, as I say, I put it down to the fact that he had a very difficult start and he was having bloods taken every hour. So that was the sensory processing disorder. He still shows every single one of those symptoms at 6. And as you can imagine, it probably gets a little bit more difficult as they get older, because you can't really control a lot of the environments that they go into. So next comes the autism with a profile of PDA, pathological demand avoidance. Now, this has had a lot of negative, I feel, a negative response from people. You get the eye rolls when you say it's pathological demand avoidance. You get the, oh, well, hasn't every child got that? The answer is no, they haven't. There's no way every child has that. You have no idea until you witness firsthand a child with PDA feeling that they are no longer in control. It is like the Tasmanian devil. We actually call Orin's moments the Hulk moments, because he literally just goes. I've kind of just thrown myself in there because with Orin, he's obsessed with Batman. Obsessed with Batman. He's now 6, coming up for 7, and he's still obsessed with Batman. He has been since the age of 2. This is the one thing that he's completely not let go of, Batman. Poor old Batman. We've got every single Batman toy that ever existed. But Louis, Orin has this ability to just go off into a fantasy world with Batman. And you've lost him for hours on end. The imagination is amazing. So again, autism never really came to mind, because one of the things that was apparent with Lewis was he had no ability to play. He had no ability to use an imagination. He just didn't understand. So, for example, I constantly play imagination games with my daughter, and we'd jump on the bed and go, let's go to Neverland. And Lewis would really get very confused and quite distressed that the bed's not going anywhere. So how are we going to Neverland? So with Orin, he's amazing. He's on the bed and he's off to Neverland with us. So at that point, autism, again, we didn't have any indication that it could be. We just thought that that's the kind of child he is, because children love to play. Obviously, children do get obsessed with toys, but they don't last 4 years and counting. Unless I think there is something else going on. That's how I feel at a very young age of 2 to start this obsession. I know when they're older, they do become interested in things, and that interest will stick. But when you're talking about a very young child, the age of 2, I do think that these obsessions are an indication, especially if they're prolonged obsessions. He would put his things in certain ways. He wouldn't line them up, but he would put them in batches. So we had the good guys and the bad guys. And if anyone mixed them up, he's not in control. You've lost him. And when I say you've lost him, the meltdowns are literally unbelievable. He will scream, he will shout. It's just an overwhelming need to express himself that he really can't do. And it's just horrible to witness as a parent. Oren's quite young, so this is obviously, as he gets older, it's going to get worse. But at the moment, we desperately try and calm him. There's just no consoling him when he's like that. And I think that's where we found that, again, the anxiety kicks in. When Oren's not in control of a situation, that is where an anxiety stems from. So if something changes that we can't control, and Oren's not in control of, we will definitely have a meltdown. For example, we had to make a quick visit to the school with my eldest because he'd had some issues going on. So it was a case of we had to go out without giving Oren the choice of going out. And that was it. I couldn't leave. Oren gets very obsessed with people. Well, not people, me. I think there is a need for dependency on one person, and that's me. I'm the one who has to brush his hair, put his shoes on. I don't know whether that's because that's what's always happened, but when Kieran's off and he needs to do the shoes, the hair, he won't let him. I believe this is another one of the symptoms that he becomes overly dependent on one person. So as far as socially goes, Oren is very sociable with adults, but it has to be a conversation of Oren's choosing. It has to be on his terms, and what he wants to talk about, he will talk about. I know this was one thing that came up on the ADOS, where they sort of started talking about bikes. And Oren wasn't interested in this guy's bike. He just, no, I'm talking about me and my Batman toys. And that's where the conversation went back to. I know that's very similar to Lewis with the autism, because Lewis will struggle to have a conversation not of something that interests him. Oren struggles massively to sympathise with anybody. He can sympathise with things, but not people. So, for example, we were putting the Christmas tree up one year, and there was a couple of decorations that were looking a bit tatty, and we said, no, we'll just leave them in the box. And again, Oren was hysterical that these poor decorations were going to be sad. These decorations were going to be sad, that he couldn't put them on the tree. So we obviously ended up having them on the tree. But it just makes me realise that if that was, say, my daughter, who was incredibly upset, Oren cannot see her point of view at all, not even in the slightest. It's like a Jekyll and Hyde. Having a child with PDA is a Jekyll and Hyde. 1 minute he's absolutely perfect, and it just the slightest little thing, and you can't second guess it. I think that's the thing with the PDA. With a child with autism, you can almost predict what's going to cause a problem, whereas with a child with PDA, there's nothing predictable at all, and that makes it very, very difficult. He's very impulsive. He just has to go and do something. Now, he's recently been diagnosed with ADHD as well. Now, I'm not sure, and don't shoot me, but I can't say how much of this is ADHD and how much is the PDA, because I believe that they're very common to be hand in hand anyway. Oren struggles with peers. He can't sympathise with them. He only sees his way. He's got to control the situation. If he doesn't, then that's it. Again, there's no regulation of his feelings. There's nothing to sort of you can't calm him down until he's ready to calm down. He will just lose it, completely lose it. There's no other way of saying it, really. I think other parents with children with PDA understand what I'm saying when I say they lose it. They really do lose it. It's like they're on a rant. There's no social etiquette there for Oren at all. He couldn't care less what Tom, Dick and Harry think. He couldn't care less where he is when he's having his meltdowns. And if something's not gone Oren's way, I think the whole world knows it's not gone Oren's way. It's very difficult to try and explain that to people because people assume it's the child who wants their own way and is spoiled. And that is not the case. Shouting it out of them won't help you. And certainly telling the parent that it's their own fault won't help either. I'm sure you can hear by my tone that feel very strongly about that because it has been said to me in the past that it is my parenting. And it really isn't. It's not. It is a diagnosis. The National Autistic Society does recognise it as a profile for autism. It is a real thing, and I would invite anybody to come and spend the day and see what we have to deal with, and tell me that it's a spoiled child, because it isn't. If you have a little snippet of somebody in an hour or a 2 hour slot, then yes, I can probably see where it could appear to be a spoiled child. But when you're there with them and you can see the anxiety, the pain that child's feeling when something isn't right, you know. Now, I had an inclination that it was PDA because of the fact that it's just the swing of how quickly he would go from calm to not right. And then when he's not right, it takes such a long time for him to calm down. Now, someone showed me a graph once and it's really helped process it in my mind. So for a neurotypical person, you're on this line. For someone with autism, this is their calm line. So if you're down here, it takes you longer to get to your peak point. So people with autism are here. So it's going to be such a quick to the point of arousal and a point of getting very cross very quickly. Now, that's something that I think is very important to bear in mind. A child who is having a temper tantrum, as soon as you give them their way, it's gone away. The temper tantrum's done, it's finished. With a child with autism, you could give them what they wanted and it's almost like they've gone inside and you can't get them back out until they're ready to come back out. Oren, I know, has to have certain things in a certain way. He has to have a routine on his terms. So the routine can't be the same as Lewis's routine, which is set in stone and put on a board in pictures. It has to be the way that Oren wants it to be. Oren has certain things that he has, and it has to have them, certain cups, certain cutlery, certain plates. He is very particular about packaging. He has to have certain packaging, and I think that's where the autism comes in, to the fact that is very common with an autism diagnosis, that it's the need for the same, everything to be the same. But the PDA is definitely something that is very apparent, I feel, very apparent. When you read how impulsive they are, how it has to be their way, or the temper just, I've never seen anything like it from a child. And that to me is the pinnacle point, that you realise that actually that this is definitely, excuse me, sorry, I never had any doubt that this is what it was with Oren, and that's how we knew it was. So I hope again you found this a little bit beneficial. I know PDA is very, very new. I know there is a couple of specialists, private specialists. I believe in some areas CAMs have started to diagnose and paediatricians. But again, I think it depends on your reasoning for wanting the diagnosis. I'll touch on that on the next video because again, having the two boys, both of them had a very, very different diagnosis process. So the next video will be about what you do next. What do you do? You know, you've got these symptoms. Who do you go to? So thanks for watching, and join me again for me to explain what I feel, well, what I did next, and what I feel that would be the best way forwards for you guys. So thanks. Bye.